Conflict within the Congo technically began when the Congo gained its independence in June 1960. The groundwork for this conflict began much earlier, though, laid out by the growing tensions between America, the USSR, and their respective allies. As my colleague Natufe puts it, the Congo and a range of other countries acted as the initial testing grounds of Cold War muscle flexing. This is to say that the events and context of the Congo crisis mirror similar decolonization struggles of the time period and highlight the significant role that the ideological tensions of the Cold War played in catalyzing and perpetuating this conflict. Here's the Congo, and here's Belgium. With Ghana, Morocco, Tunisia, and Guinea recently gaining independence, a broad trend towards decolonization can be observed throughout the northern half of Africa. While this trend disrupted colonial powers like Belgium, who for example relied significantly on colonies' resources, it also provided an opportunity for the USSR to remotely attack the West by allying with decolonizing powers. The independence celebration of the Congo is a good place to start in order to understand exactly how the West and the East managed to pit themselves against each other in this manner. We've decided to grant you your independence. However, you should remember the lengths we went to free you from slavery and disease. With all due respect, we have seen nothing but exploitation and apartheid perpetuated by yourselves in this country. And frankly, you're racist.
L'indépendance du Congo constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II.
Combattant de l'indépendance, aujourd'hui victorieux. Je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres.
What would ensue was an incomplete version of independence for the Congo. Belgium understood this statement as a show of defiance and independence, which they never seemed to want to fully grant to the Congo in the first place. Although the Congo wanted to govern itself independently, there were only 30 university graduates in the entire country, which caused, along with the defiance mentioned earlier, Belgium to maintain control of certain government affairs and the military in the Congo. As can be expected, this simply caused a greater effort for decolonization, ultimately attracting the attention and help of the USSR through the Belgian Communist Party. Belgium, how bad do you really need these resources in Congo? 'Cause you know, after that French defeat in Vietnam, your case for imperialism is looking pretty weak right now. This is none of your business. Actually, the Congo requested our help, and who in their right mind wouldn't pass up this sweet opportunity to grab some cobalt and some great PR? And just like that, two countries are fighting over resources that don't belong to them in the first place, and injecting their ideological polarity into a country seeking to rid itself of imperialist influences.
So, before we get into the direct intervention in the region, it's important to note that the Congo is already very much intertwined with Western interests. To quote the wise words of George W. Bush, the Congo is ready for the seeds of freedom to be planted, which is of course to say that it was natural resource rich and a perfect opportunity for economic exploitation. We'll now turn to the UN, which represent the Western Bloc, and Belgium, which represents Belgium. Now, at this time, the Congo is bordered by several Western Allied countries, most notably Angola and Northern Rhodesia. Also at this time, the UN and Belgium were very worried that there were independence movements brewing in the region, because there were, and they were particularly worried about the Congo, notably because it had access to a lot of cobalt, which is useful both in the arms race and in keeping Western European economies afloat. Now, let's have a little look at what Belgium was so worried about. Hey, so I've been hearing you've been having some trouble in Africa. What's going on over there? Oh, geez. Well, this Patrice Lumumba fellow is getting involved in all these all-African peoples conferences. I'm a little worried that he's going to make it difficult for us to make off with the Congo's cobalt. Oh, yeah. Been there before. You heard what happened in Nyasaland, right? The Russians are teaming up with the independence movements. The Soviets are taking our land. Oh, man, we can't have that. These bombs aren't going to make themselves. Got any ideas? Well, If I were in your shoes, I would try and get closer to Lumumba, surrounded by people you know, that sort of thing. Maybe destabilize the independence movement, delegitimize it, something along those lines. I don't know though. It sounds tricky. We're gonna try and stay out of all this. Huh. I like where your head's at. I think I got an idea. So now we'll turn back to the Congo. Now, prior to the Congo's independence in 1960, several independence movements were taking shape. The Movement National Congolais, or NMC, is of particular interest. Patrice Lumumba was the president of the NMC, and they were positioned as the only national independence movement, focusing on nationalism and unification. The Belgians conspired with Albert Collongy to create a rift in the movement, splitting it into two groups. Now, the Belgian-inspired NMC split inspired a third group called the Patrie Solidaire Africaine, PSA, which espoused Christianity, tribalism, and an anti-communist agenda, strikingly Western. Ultimately, however, the Congo did achieve their independence on June 30th, 1960, under some distinctly Belgian pretenses, however. Setting the scenes for US and Soviet intervention, Patrice Lumumba was elected prime minister and was flanked by Joseph Kasavu and Moise Tshombe, both of whom were allied with the Belgians, as well as more generally the Western Bloc. This polarized arrangement, with Lumumba surrounded by defenders of the imperialist status quo, gave way to the conflict we'll be looking at in the next segment.
The polarized arrangement of alliance systems played a significant role in the events of the Congo crisis. The USSR allied with the Congo in order to withhold resources from the West and ultimately destabilize Western powers. To counter this, Western countries allied with themselves and Kasavubu to implement an imperialist agenda in the Congo. This meant that a Western attack on the decolonization movement of the Congo was an attack on the USSR and communism, and any reaction from the Congo to this attack was an attack against the entire West and capitalism. In each case, the Congo served as nothing more than a pawn in the ideological games being played by the East and West. And with this notion, decolonization became largely associated with communism, simply because it opposed the agenda of the West. But why was the USSR so interested in the Congo in the first place?
I've talked to Western powers and even neighboring African states about putting an end to the Belgian exploitation in the Congo, but nobody seems to care. I know you were pretty supportive with the Guevara guy. Do you think you could help us out? Well, you've come to the right place. But you should know that our support comes with our ideology. That's okay. We just need to get these Belgians out of here. Okay. We'll send their air force down there immediately and transport Ghanaian troops to the Congo. We'll also be taking interest in your Western affiliated borders and cobalt resources, though. Okay.
As you can already see, the Congo-Soviet alliance was one made out of a measure of desperation. While the Congo benefited in some ways from their USSR alliance, they were also drawn into a much larger conflict in which they had no representation, existing only so far as they were recognized by the Soviet Union. After stealing documents and discovering this alliance, Western powers formed a sort of alliance of their own with the UN.
Ils prennent la décision, ils font un télégramme adressé à Khrouchtchev pour lui demander l'envoi des troupes de l'Union soviétique pour venir chasser les Belges. Ce télégramme, avant même qu'il ne sorte, est volé au secrétaire de Lumumba par son ancien directeur de cabinet qui s'appelait Kandolo Damien.
Ordering Belgium to withdraw from the Congo and supplying troops to be specifically controlled by Lumumba, UN actions initially seemed reasonable. The system of alliances, however, allowed for corruption within Lumumba's UN forces, actually run by a British commander who was openly opposed to anti-colonialism. At this point, Lumumba was fighting against Belgian forces and their occupation of Katanga, as well as, now, UN forces determined to prevent Congolese independence.
So Belgium, what do you say we create some sort of alliance here in Congo? Sounds good to me, but we need to establish some regulations in order to best exploit the Congo. I think, first of all, no non-UN plane should be allowed to land in the Gili airport. I like how you think. What do you say we finance a military coup led by Mobutu? That would throw this country into chaos, which is exactly what we need to reassume control of the resources. Sounds perfect. And while we're at it, we can expel the Soviets along with Lumumba and show how great imperialism is.
The United States deplores the unilateral action of the Soviet Union in supplying aircraft and other equipment for military purposes to the Congo. The Soviet action, which seems to be motivated entirely by the Soviet Union's political designs in Africa.
Greatly outnumbered in terms of military power, Lumumba is captured and executed in Katanga under the supervision of the UN. The world continues spinning, and Western powers are reunited with their beloved cobalt in a sense of ideological superiority.
The Congo crisis was a bombastic demonstration of the impacts the superpower tensions had on non-aligned countries during the Cold War. The imposition of the West versus East dynamic on the struggle for independence in the Congo created a complex battlefield, both ideologically and physically. The DRC had its independence, but was not so quickly free of imperialistic influences and exploitation as it became a plaything of superpowers. The theoretically post-colonial DRC, as a result of global polarization and imperialist interests, continued to experience many of the same issues that plagued its colonial past, despite the efforts of people like Patrice Lumumba, who fought to bring independence to the region. So, we hope you've enjoyed our little show. I, for one, need some new socks. But until next time, this has been Historians with Socks.